Welcome back. Today we're going to take a quick look at the Performer 5 Plus 2. Not the Performer 7, but the 5 Plus 2. So here it is up close, and I do want to thank HiFiGo for touring this set. It's not quite out yet at the time of this review, so I don't know what the final price is going to be, but I do want to thank them for giving me the opportunity to give this one a listen. So I think the faceplate resembles a gemstone. It's actually quite nice to look at, kind of get a quick close-up look at it. The back of it, not a whole lot going on with the black bottom of it. The nozzle has the 3 tubes. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a nicely done hybrid. I think what I actually noticed about picking it up in my hand is the weight of it. So for those of you who have picked up any of the recent hybrids, like the two 10mm dynamic drivers, those have some weight to it. Those magnets are actually kind of heavy. This one, two 6mm dynamic drivers, so it is a little lighter in weight. It's probably going to be more comfortable for some people. The size of it isn't, it kind of has hybrid size to it, which they're always going to be a little bit chunky to fit in the balanced armatures. But the nozzle, I think it's not all that bad compared to the issues that I had with Cantor. The cable is an 8-core cable, which you don't see all that often, so kind of a nice change up to see a full 8-core, nicely done, almost a gunmetal style color to it. So yeah, nicely done. I think this one is not a modular, it is a 3.5mm. I guess it comes in a 4.4 maybe, but yeah, I mean, they could have tossed in a modular, but they chose to not do that. So we'll kind of jump into it. And what is it? Like I said, it is the Performer 5 Plus 2. So it is two 6mm dynamic drivers, 4 balanced armatures, and 1 ultra-high microplaner. So yeah, so kind of along the lines of other tribrids that we've seen in the past year. I would say that I don't remember which one of them actually used two 6mm, possibly none of them. But yeah, I think that was sort of one of those things that I noticed is the base is going to be slightly different compared to some of the recent 2 dynamic or the double dynamic drivers, even if they are in tribrid configuration. I think just hearing 2 6s is a little bit different. I think maybe KZ probably came a little closer. I think they use a 6 and a 7 or a 6 and an 8, something like that. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to see 2 6mm, and we'll see how that all worked out. So for those of you wondering if it is better than P5, P8, I never heard P5, but I will assume this is better than P5. I wasn't really a fan of the Performer 8, so I would actually take 5 Plus 2 over the 8. But I will say that P5 Plus 2, Performer 5 Plus 2, is likable for fans of forwardness. I almost call it the close talker. They really push the vocals kind of really forward, kind of in your face, and you'll ask about every other hybrid that's out there, all the ZGATs and the hypes and the dust and all those things, and none of them really didn't really push the vocals forward in that way. So you can ask about it and try to compare them, but this style is going to appeal to very specific people who are really into vocals. That is their priority. They like them really close in and intimate. Everyone else, you're probably used to hearing a typical U-shaped style set, and that doesn't have these vocals really pushed in that close. And I would say it's almost forward vocals at the expense of everything else. And I would say noticeable right out of the box. The stage isn't all that big. Again, these forward vocals really tend to mess with the stage and make it flatter. It's not peaky, but there are bright spots to it. And if you'll recognize the 3S's, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we'll get to it a little bit later. And the microplanar advantage is kind of lost in the boost along with everything else. So again, I would say this is another set that had a microplanar, and up until this point, I've actually liked all the implementations on the microplanars. You can nitpick some of them, but this is probably the one that I like the least, and we'll get to that later. So the sound, V or W shape, it kind of comes across more of a W shape because it's got the vocals kind of pushed forward. It definitely has that forced forward sound to it. If you've ever heard something like, it's not unique to Performer. The old TRN sets actually used to do the same thing. They had very close-in intimate vocals. I think of this as more of an older chi-fi kind of thing, so it was kind of odd to hear it again, and especially in light of all the other hybrids who don't do this, it's different to hear it done. And again, I think it's a bit divisive. I think people who like that will like it. People who don't like it and think it comes at the expense of everything else will probably move on to different sets. But the bass, I will say I like it because the level can handle genres that can use it, and it doesn't sound mid-bass, light, or thin, kind of those problems that with Cantor. For a pair of 6mm, I think the rumble depth is actually quite good, and that's kind of what you would expect from 6mm. The impact tactility is just kind of okay. It's a bit soft. It's not quite there. And again, not all that shocking for a 6mm. They're pretty good at this bit. This bit, not so much. I mean, they just don't move that much air. They don't have that tactility to them that you would get in a 10mm or even an 8mm. So I like the level. I think it's actually pretty nice for the amount of sub bass they can crank out with it. Again, that's not all that surprising for a 6mm, but I do like it because it wasn't as distracting. It doesn't, but at the same time, it doesn't actually stand out. So tuning could have used a little bit more finesse, but it would have been hard to do something different with two 6mm if you had changed it up to the asymmetric pairing, like a 10 and a 6, or an 8 and a 6, or some other combination. I think you have more flexibility with tuning and put a little more finesse into the split between the sub bass and the mid bass. They kind of gave you a traditional sub bass heavy sound to it. So, I give them props for not making it distracting or boomy or bloating, but that's sort of what you get with a 6mm. It can do a lot of sub bass, but it tends to not bloat or boom as much as a 10mm. But at the same time, it's not going to have that presence that you're going to get on a 10mm either. So the mids, with a little bit extra bass that they included here, the vocals are pushed forward and boosted, like I said, and that tends to flatten the stage, kind of flattens and smooth out the textures, but that's really going to appeal to people who really prioritize vocals. Then that transition, they sort of push it forward here, and this whole transition into the treble is kept at a higher level, and that tends to, so if you combine this upper level with the treble with this upper level on the bass, that tends to sort of crowd around the mids, and you lose a little bit of the layering and separation, and is higher, so you get that sense of separation, layering, and space. Kind of, you don't quite get that on this set. And like I said, I would say that they prioritize this over everything else for that reason. Because along with this pushing the vocals forward, you have the bass that kind of falls in right next to it. The treble is right next to it. You don't have a whole lot of separation between the frequencies. You don't have a lot of contrast. Everything kind of blends together. And again, this isn't really like the other hybrids in that way, because everything is sort of in a smaller stage on top of each other. It gets a little bit crowded. So I'll say that the timbre is actually kind of fine, but combined with the forwardness and the layering, it's very much a set that is going to target specific listener styles, people who would like that style. I find it a little bit divisive, but does it sound like a hybrid? I think yes, it does, but more of a smooth, balanced armature style than sharp edges. It doesn't really have a technical edge to it. It's got kind of a warmer, smoother style to it because they left a lot of bass into it. That kind of softens everything here. Then they start pushing these forward to try to put that little bit of edge into it, but it doesn't quite come across that way. So the treble, I will say this will be my least favorite part, and the tuning just left a little bit too much energy all the way out to air. I think the bass was a bit too much, so there's a bit too much treble out here. You kind of get that boost here at 2 to 5, then at 5 to 7, and then at 10 and above. They left all of these values. If you look at where 10 is, it's kind of right up, it's even above the mids. It's about 5 dB above the mids. Quite a bit of extra energy all the way out there. So I do think that 2 to 3K, I think popping the vocals forward, I think that was fine. That was, if that's what they want to do for that tuning, I think that actually works out kind of well for people who are really into that. But then leaving 5 to 7, again, those snares kind of pop forward. You do get some hard S's from the sibilants on around 7, and those tend to rise above the mids and they become more noticeable. And then when you combine that with the 10K, and they were really trying to push the microplanar over the bass. So like I said, there's a lot of sub bass here, and that tends to mask what's over here. So they left a lot of energy here to push that forward so you could hear the microplanar. But the driver really wasn't liking that much energy. It sounds overdriven, a little bit less natural. It's the one microplanar that I didn't really like because it layers this hard S on the 5 to 7. So you get some unnaturalness from just the air region. And then that layers on top of the 5 to 7. So that gets a little bit sharper. And that just adds a little, I call it a timbre shift. And that's exactly what happens here. So if they just tilted this down just a little bit more tilted this down a little bit more, I think they would have had a more natural sounding set and something that was kind of more along the lines of the other hybrids. But this is what they chose to do. So yeah, I think everything was kind of fine up until that microplaner. And you know, it's like any other planar driver. If you kind of push it out of its comfort zone, it tends to sound less natural. It sounds more like the timbre kind of goes off the way planars do, and it's kind of sort of what they did here. And this is probably the first set that I really heard them, or heard a brand really push a microplaner in that way. And again, it just kind of sounds a little bit off to me. But that is what I got on Performer 5 Plus 2. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.